Hello, dreamer. Welcome to Whispers of Time, where history breathes softly in the dark, and every story is a lullaby from the past. Close your eyes and imagine the land after rain. They rang the abbey bell before the sun, and in that first hard note, I knew the day would try to take everything from me. I was on the wall walk, half-armoured, breath turning white in the chill. The valley was still a smudge of grey when the watchman thrust the horn to his lips and blew a sound that ran the roofs and rattled the dovecotes. Far off, like a line of ants across a table, came the enemy banners rolled tight against the dew, horses stepping carefully, pikes shouldered like saplings after a storm. We had known they would come. We did not know they would come today. "Captain Aldrich," the boy called up from the stair, "from the bakery lane urgent." I turned. A runner stood panting in the half-light, a miller's son with flour in his hair and a letter clutched tight. Wax, white and plain. The seal said nothing. The hand that had closed it said everything. I broke it with a thumb and read by memory more than sight. "If the bells sound for battle, do not look for me in the square. I will be at the east gate with the bread and the old women. If the road falls, I will be on it. If you find me, do not turn back. If you do not find me, know that I walked toward you as far as I could." Isabel. Behind the walls, the town was waking the way a house wakes to fire fast and without grace. Doors banged, pails clattered. A groom cursed a horse that would not stand for harness. The baker's upper window spilled a wedge of yellow into the street, and the smell of hot loaves came into the morning as if someone had dreamed of warmth and managed to bake it. For a moment the bell's toll, the horn, the tramp of men all seemed less true than the simple fact that someone had remembered to feed us. Isabel had remembered. She always did. I folded the letter and slid it under the gorget against my collarbone. It sat there like a second pulse. "Hoist the red," I told the watchman. "Let them know we are awake." Below, the courtyard boiled. Squires ran panes of water along helmets. Mail chafed. A dog barked at the cavalry and then thought better of it. I took the stair two at a time and the world became tighter, louder, nearer. My men were already forming around the cart shed, 12 in the first rank with bills, 12 behind with spears, the young ones white-lipped and determined, the old ones already quiet the way stones are quiet. "Poleaxes for the front," I said. "Short spears behind. Marcus, you keep the second line sober. Ulrich, your lads guard the left breastwork. Nobody plays a hero this morning. I need all of you this evening." "And this evening," Marcus said, trying for lightness. His beard was more grey than black now. It suited him. "This evening we're tired and the bread is fresh," I said. Isabel promised. His eyes flicked toward my breastplate. "A letter." I didn't answer. He didn't ask. I let them see me don the last of the armour. The squire buckled the straps, snugging metal to padding with the rhythm of a prayer. The weight spread and settled. I rolled my shoulders, bent, stood. The world sharpened into two narrowed windows and the echo of my own breath. It is a trick the armour plays. It makes everything outside seem far and everything inside seem loud. Men who panic and harness panic because they think the world has shrunk to the size of their heads. Men who live learn to ride the echo like a boat rides a slow river. "Look at me," I told the front rank. "We don't win in the first rush. We win because our feet are where we put them, and our breath is ours and not theirs. Hook, hammer, spike. If you cannot strike, you shove. If you cannot shove, you stand. If you cannot stand, you kneel and hold. There is honour in all three." They nodded. Some swallowed. A boy named Etienne tried to spit and found he had no saliva left. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Breathe through your nose," I said. "2 in, 1 out. Don't waste the air God gave you." The gate captain shouted from the tunnel. They deploy in the meadow. Siege carts behind their line, ladders on the left, a ram in the centre. Cavalry holding the low ridge to the east, 2 banners only. East. The road to the abbey. The road to the bakeries. The road where Isabel would be, if she was foolish or brave enough to do what she always did, which was to choose the need in front of her and to trust me to make the rest of the needs behave. A horn called beyond the fields, A curt professional sound. Their banners unfurled, one blue, one dirty white with a wolf that looked more like a dog on its hind legs. Drums took up a pace. The morning had become a clock, and we were the gears. Positions, I said. Let them bring their ladders. Let them think we are timber. We will be stone. The first climb. They did not run. Armies full of fools run. Armies that intend to take a wall walk as if the wall has already agreed to be taken. Their first rank came with tall shields, the kind that make a man into a door. Behind them, ladder-bearers trotted in step, halberds over their shoulders. Crossbowmen paused, cranked, looked up, loosed, then cranked again. The bolts knocked splinters from our merlons and chewed the banners where they hung. We crouched behind the crenels, counting the beats. "Wait," I said. "Wait." The space between wait and now grows long in memory, but in truth it is a coin's thickness. "Now," I said, and the first rank of our wall woke like a cat. Buckets tilted, sand hissed down the ladders and into faces. Hooks reached. A ladder scraped sideways, then slid, dropping 8 men in a clutch into the ditch. A barrel of stones went over with a grunt and thudded its argument into their shield line. The men behind raised their shields higher, the way a man raises a collar against rain, and stepped forward into the small clearance we had made by knocking other men down. "Again," I said. "Work, don't wish." We worked. The gate shuddered once under the first probing of the ram and then rested. Our archers along the upper walk counted their curses, saved their arrows for faces and thighs. Etienne loosed one, swore he'd missed, and then brightened. Not at the fall of a man, but at the way the man's ladder tilted as he fell, and made the next man step back to avoid being struck. "Inches, boy," Marcus called to him. "A day is made of inches." They set their first ladder, a beautiful, straight thing with iron shoes on the side rails and smooth rungs that would please a carpenter, into the ditch muck and leaned it up under our nearest crenelle. A man came up it with a shield like a turtle shell, and a short sword that showed just enough to give him belief. I took the billhook from the wall rack, set the beak under the shield's lower rim, and lifted like I was taking a carpet by the fringe. The man, and then the shield, left the ladder. He cartwheeled, arms a windmill, and vanished backward into the gap as neat as a stone into a pond. He might live, he might not. My job did not change either way. Another came. Marcus met him with a hammer whose face had kissed 100 helmets. He did not swing hard. He placed the blow like a mason sets a wedge. The man's visor rang. He crouched without meaning to, and in that crouch 2 of ours leaned and shoved and turned a ladder into a bridge to nowhere. It was work. It was not glory. The air filled with the smell of sap from broken ladders and the sharper stink of men sweating fear into wool. The ram thumped again, stubborn as a man knocking at a door that would not open. Crossbow bolts cracked against stone and sent bright chips skittering into our faces. I tasted grit. I tasted iron. Between waves, I looked east. On the low ridge, their cavalry had edged forward, not to charge. Any fool who charges a wall dies famous and unburied, but to show they existed, to make us worry about all the things a horse can do once it finds a road. Beyond them, near the line of poplars that marked the river path, I saw movement that was not military. A string of carts, slow, stubborn, purposeful, trundling toward the east gate. Flower wagons, the old women, the children walking too fast to pretend they were playing. I could not see her. I could feel where she would be in the line, and where she would be if the road were to fall. "Hold," I told the wall. "We don't bleed for their first idea. We hold for their second." Their second idea was better. They brought the ladders in with men who knew the difference between zeal and craft. They pushed shields into the ditch muck to make stepping stones, and planted the feet of the ladders on those shields. They set 2 ladders close and a third 10 paces off, so we had to guess which to favour. A boy in our line guessed wrong, rushed the lone ladder and met nobody there. The other 2 filled with men climbing at a pace that felt like a clock being wound. "Back!" I barked, and we shifted as one, the front rank hopping sideways 2 paces to meet the thicker flow. A helmet appeared, bright, vision slit open to the throat. I thrust the beak of the poleaxe into the slit, not with rage, but with the mean practicality of a man fitting a nail in a tight place. The face behind the slit was a mouth suddenly confused about what a mouth was for. He let go the rung. The man below took his weight and went down. The ladder jerked. "Right ladder, Marcus. Hook!" 2 of ours reached as one. The ladder came toward us, then lurched back, tugged by hands below. We let it go, then took it again, then let it go again, and in that indecision the men on it lost their rhythm. One missed, one hung by a forearm, one decided to wait for a moment that would be kinder, and discovered there are no kind moments on a ladder under a wall. The ladder went. The men did too. The ram hit the gate clean for the first time. Whom? A sound you feel in your sternum and teeth. The tunnel threw it back in our faces, the breath of a beast. The gate captain shouted down from the murder hole. "No breach. Bars hold. They've found their stride." "Tell me when they lose it again," I said. "Ulrich." He leaned from the next tower. "I? Take 4 and go to the east walk. If their horses move, I want a song that tells me how fast." He ran, male complaining, men trotting behind with the careful haste soldiers use when they know that the next place will not be kinder than the last. The second hour of a wall fight is the hour when men decide who they are. The first hour is a promise. The second is the bill. We paid and we charged, and sometimes we made change. Etienne took a bolt through the meat of his upper arm, blinked at it as if insulted by the idea, and then sat while I pushed it through and out the other side. He swore, then laughed, then got up again and went to the bow line because it was what he could still do. The enemy, finding us stubborn on the ladders, decided to be uglier. Hooks came up on long poles to grip our shields and yank them low. Pitch pots lobbed and burst and ran like black syrup that could not choose between fire and mud. We kept the sand running. We kept the hooks working. We kept ourselves arranged in the neat, unromantic order that keeps men alive while other men try to change their arrangement. Then the horn from the east blew thin and twice. Ulrich's signal. Their cavalry was moving at last. 3. The road and the promise. "Marcus," I said, "you have the wall." He stared at me under his brow. "You'll be seen leaving?" "I intend to be seen returning," I said, and was already moving. Down the stair, through the gate tunnel where the ram thumped a slow, patient heartbeat, across the lower yard among the water carts and the boys who had not yet learned whether war was a job or a rumour. In the stable, my horse jerked at the bit and then calmed as my hand said the thing hands say to horses when the man is afraid and cannot afford to let the fear travel. The east postern was built to be ignored. It was a wicket in a wall, a slit with a door stuffed into it. 2 wagons could not pass each other in the lane beyond. 2 men could barely pass without deciding who was important. The sergeant on duty gaped at me, and then remembered himself, his shoulders finding the posture he kept for men he would rather not let through. "Open," I said. He worked the bar. "Sir, the horn was for caution. They hold the ridge. They—" "Open," I said, and he opened, and the day outside spilled in. The lane ran between hedges and chicken yards and a row of pear trees that would make children fat in late summer if there were any left to be fattened. Now the lane held a file of small wagons and old women walking beside them, their hands on the boards the way a mother steadies a cradle. Boys walked backward, bawling insults at the ridge. A priest carried a bundle that might have been books or might have been loaves, and I realised no one ever taught priests to pack for flight. "Back to the gate," the sergeant at the wicket shouted to them over my shoulder. "Back!" They looked at me instead. Hearts will always look for a single face when the world begins to tilt. I wanted to say a clever thing about courage and bread. I said instead the thing that gets carts to move. "Walk," I told them. "Slow. Do not run. Put the children on the wagons. You," I pointed at the 2 oldest boys, "take the lead ropes and don't tug. The horses can smell your fear and they despise it." "Isabel?" a baker woman called. "Where's Isabel?" The letter sat at my throat. "Where she always is," I said. "On the road you're on." The ridge, a long back of earth that could be friendly or not, had sprouted horses. 2 banners only, as the gate captain said, and men in good harness on good mounts no fools. They had not cantered because the ditch that ran along the hedgerow would break a horse's leg if a rider let the animal do a beautiful thing at the wrong time. They walked and trotted, checking the lane for a point where it widened, searching the hedges for the place where a horse could put a hoof without apologising to the farmer, who would later have to mend the sod. There was such a place by the willow stump, and they aimed for it. Between the willow and the lane, a little path ran down toward the wash that passed for a stream, and a man could ride there if he didn't mind the branches painting his helmet. The enemy mind did not mind. I rode forward alone because men who think they are knights sometimes forget what the word means. It does not mean running ahead. It means walking backward in front of other people and pretending the air is ordinary. Turn the wagons, I called to the boys. Do it now. Go nose to tail, wheel to wheel. You, I pointed at the priest, drop your bundle and lift children. If the Lord wants his books, he can carry them. He blinked, then put the books down gently, and lifted a girl who was too old to be lifted. She wrapped her arms around his neck and looked at the horses like a child looks at a storm fascinated, until the first lightning makes the ground answer. They came at a trot that wanted to be a canter, but remembered the ditch at the last moment. The front man had a lance, long and eager, its point tilting as his hand found its line. The second had a mace. The third rode with both hands on the reins and a smile, because sometimes the third man is there to see who he will be when it costs him something. Back, I said again, and this time they obeyed. I set the lance I had taken from a rack near the postern. It was a practice stick, scarred, not the perfectly tapered thing a tournament lord would boast of. It was enough. I lowered it to the angle the masters call God's finger high enough to threaten, low enough to keep my shoulder in its socket. The first horse's ears flicked at the sound of my own horse's breath. Horses know each other. It is people who pretend not to. Hold, I told my mount, and the word was for me as much as for him. The first rider thought he would have me soon and decided to announce the idea. He shouted, which is one way to waste air. He set his lance for my chest because a man in a lane looks wide, and because he had not learned the habit of seeing only what's true. I set for his shoulder because a man on a horse must choose between falling off and keeping his arm. We met. Wood sighed, then cracked. The world jolted. My mount stepped as told. My shoulder held. The man's arm decided it loved the socket more than the lance. He kept the arm and lost the weapon, and his horse kept moving because horses forgive their riders better than men forgive their luck. The second rider came with the mace, compact and honest. He aimed for my head because he was no fool. I lifted, took the blow on the edge of the helm, felt the world ring and twist, and stayed where my legs had promised to stay. I answered with the butt of my lance as if knocking on a door. The skull under his visor heard me without interest. He kept moving because it's what men do when their bodies have not yet counted the cost. The third man had not decided to be anything yet. He came late, saw the first two free of me, and lifted his blade as if to explain himself. I gave him no time to speak. My horse stepped, my lance stub slid under his right rein and lifted, and horse and man together made the decision I wanted, sidestep and then stop. "Go!" I shouted to the carts. "Now! Walk!" They walked. God bless them, they walked. The boys led, the priest carried, the old women set their shoulders to the windy business of survival. The enemy's fourth and fifth riders had not found room to pass their friends in the lane, and when they tried to force space, the hedges told them what hedges tell horses. Then she was there, running beside the last cart, her hair braided tight, flower on her cheek like a blessing. Isabel had no armour and no sense of what stories were for. She had a rope around her waist with loaves tied in cloth the way a fisherman ties fish to keep them in the river. When she saw me, she smiled, and when she smiled, the morning did not change, but it believed it could. "Get back," I said. "Please." "After the last cart," she said, and put a loaf into a child's hands and did not stop to see if the child would eat it or throw it at a horse. "Are you hurt?" "Not yet." "Try to keep it that way," she said, and slapped my horse's shoulder because she trusted animals more than men. The enemy recovered from their surprise like water recovers its surface after a stone. More riders edged off the ridge to our left. A pair tried the willow lane. One smart man dismounted and came on foot because he understood lanes better than horses did. "Inside," I called to the sergeant. "Open and swallow, now." The wicket door stood wide like a kiss you can run through. The carts began to disappear into the mouth of the wall. A boy tripped and Isabel had him up again with a hand in his belt and a word like a hinge. The dismounted man came fast, shield low, sword high. He was well taught. I liked him and wanted him elsewhere. I dropped the lance and took the poleaxe from my saddle scabbard. We met in the kind of space where men stop calling themselves soldiers and become men again. He thrust for my thigh smart. A Legend's days. I turned the spike down and knocked his blade aside, then hooked his shield's inside edge and pulled, while my horse stepped back because a horse does not need to be told how to help a man who has asked for it before. He lost a foot of ground and decided to leap into me before he lost two. I brought the hammer face down onto the crown of his helm, with the neat, unromantic force you use to seat a nail through stubborn oak. He went to a knee. He might have lived. He might tell a son someday that he learned the difference between zeal and craft. I hope so. Behind him, the lane made a decision. A rider squeezed past his friend and found his horse's hoof in the ditch, and had to spend all his concentration on not breaking anything. Another shouted at a hedge and discovered hedges are deaf. The third bent his head to find an angle, and did not notice that my horse had moved just enough for my shadow to land where his eyes wanted to be. "Go," I told Isabel one more time, and this time she went. We backed into the wicket like a tide flowing into a narrow place. The sergeant counted heads in his own rough arithmetic. 1, 2, all then through the bar like a farmer throwing seed. A hoof struck the door. Wood remembered the tree it had been and held. "Good," I told him, and meant it. My hands shook where no one could see. Isabel leaned against the stone, braid half undone, chest rising like a bird that cannot decide whether to fly. I lifted the visor. There she was, close enough to tell me the colour of my eyes without guessing. She laughed once, the sound a little broken, and then reached up and touched the dent on my helm, as if she were smoothing the day with her fingers. "You promised bread," I said, because some words have kept men living when bigger ones failed. "You promised to come back," she said, eyes bright, and placed a loaf in my free hand like it was a ceremony and a joke. I pretended not to notice her hand tremble. She pretended not to notice mine. "Back to the wall," I said, and the sergeant nodded as if I had done something clever when really I had only done the arithmetic of a lane. I fall. The gate that learned our names. The ram said hello again just as I came under the gate vault, and this time the greeting was warmer. The murder holes snored smoke and brick dust down on our heads. The braces groaned the way old men groan when they stand. If the enemy outside had been fools, they would have cheered to hear it. They were not fools, and fools do not build good rams. "Report," I told the captain above. "The gate remembers its tree, sir," he called down, and I smiled because that meant it still held. "They've learned the rhythm. 3 soft to find the seam, 1 hard to punish it." "Punish back," I said. "Oil to the slots, sand to the stairs. If they make the arch, make them sorry they learned how." On the wall, the 2nd hour had become the 3rd, and the 3rd hour is where many men would rather be elsewhere. On both sides, voices dull, hands grow clumsy, hopes remember their cost. We kept our order not because we were better people, but because our feet had been taught where to be when the mind forgets. We knocked ladders. We took the hits we had to take and did not pretend the hurts were messages from God. Etienne found a rhythm on the bow and learned the trick of breathing out as he loosed so that his hands stayed soft. Marcus paced and placed men like stones in a stream, so that the water had to go where he wanted it to. Ulrich sent a runner with the news that the cavalry had edged eastward to try the river path, and found it in flood a gift from last night's rain and the miller's prayers. "Tell them thank you," I said. "Tell them to pray again about the gate." The gate groaned. The braces answered. The captain above muttered a curse about fathers who do not teach their sons to count to 4. I climbed to the walkway over the tunnel and peered through the murder slot. The ram was a neat thing, iron-bound, wheeled, with a little roof of planks and hides that dripped from earlier attentions. Its crew worked like men who had been paid to work and believed in the worth of their wages. Up the lane behind them, men waited with long hooks to snag the gate when it complained enough to open. "Buckets," I said. "Not on the ram, on the men at the hooks. They can be brave for wood, make them honest about heat." We poured. Oil, then sand to make it bite, then fire to give it an opinion. The hooks vanished for a while as their owners discovered that choice is easier when your hair is not burning. The ram pounded. The wood learned the lesson and repeated it louder, as wood will do when taught well. The braces sang their answer. In the narrow gap where the leaf met the post, dust curled and drifted like a fine fog. "How many hours in a day?" Marcus asked at my shoulder. "As many as we can pay for," I said. "Then buy us 2 more, he said, and left to spend men where they would become evening instead of noon. It is a strange thing to say, but it is true. All the while the letter at my collarbone steadied me. If you do not find me, know that I walked toward you as far as I could. I had found her. She had walked. Now I had to do the simple, brutal work of being the man she had walked toward. They changed tactics on the wall first. A whistle blew below, and the ladder lines paused. Then the ladders came not like teeth on a comb, but like fingers. 2 here, 3 there, then none, then 4 on a tower where the crenels were narrow and the parapet low. We had to stretch, and when you stretch, you thin. They are always counting your inches. "Rotate," I called. "Front rank 2 back, second up." Fresh arms took heavy tools. Weariness went to the bow and the buckets and the work that keeps breath inside chests. We were still moving men when a sound like a cough came from the gate. I felt it under my boots more than I heard it. "There," the captain said uselessly because we all knew where. "Left leaf, low hinge." "Wedges," I said, and boys came with triangular truths in their hands. We set them and hammered until the wood stopped pretending it would stay square on its own. The ram answered with its one hammered sentence. The wedges answered with theirs. This is all war is in the end. Simple statements repeated until one set of statements stopped sounding like truth. V, the breaking hour. The sun reached a place where the crenel stones burned your palms if you pressed them too long. We drank in sips and spat when we had to. The enemy's archers, Northmen by the cut of their caps, crept within decent range and picked at our slots with the patience of tailors picking threads. One found the meat of my thigh where the cuisse gaped, a neat hard pinch that I ignored in the way men ignore news they cannot afford to read. "Captain," Ulrich's runner again, bright-eyed with importance. "Riverpath holds. Cavalry turned back. They break to the west, moving toward the orchard gullies." "They want shadow," Marcus said. "We've given them too much sun." "Ladders in the west angle," came a call, and the wall swayed, the way a ship sways when the sea decides to remind you who made it. We ran there. You do not let the men see you run often. You run when the wall asks. 4 ladders up at once, one rim to rim with our crenels, so fat we could not hook it without leaning out beyond the safe line. Men came steady up it, helmet to helmet, shields locking. Behind them, someone clever had ordered a pair of mantelets dragged up to shade the base and keep our arrows honest. Etienne braced and found a slit on a thigh and made the man hang a moment, stuck through the leg like a chicken on a spit. The next man used him as a step and came on anyway. That's how it happens when men believe in the place behind them more than they fear the place in front. I took the poleaxe's hook and reached deep not for men but for the ladder's cheek. A gust of hot wind from the ram's work in the gate tunnel blew into my visor and stung my eyes. I blinked and placed the hook by feel, then levered with my hips like a farmer levering a stone. The ladder shifted, then held, then shifted again as if the earth had remembered something. 2 of ours leaned with me. Marcus brought his hammer down on the rung to jar hands off. The triumph I had counted too soon stuck in my throat when a clever enemy shoved a spar under the ladder's foot and made the earth a partner again. The ladder grinned in my face and declined to leave. "Spikes," I said. "Points. Take faces." We did the ugly thing. We did the necessary thing. The first man to show his eyes to see where his feet would land went back down with the knowledge that he should have looked at me instead. The second took a spike through the meat at the collar and discovered that armour is a city of doors and we had found one. The third hung, hacking, until his own men stepped on his hands and made room the only way you can when the wall does not want you. The ram coughed again. This time the cough was a word. "Down!" the captain shouted from above the tunnel. "Down and ready!" He was a good man. He had a last argument prepared. We stacked the inner door with tables and beams. We dragged 2 wagons from the yard and kicked their pins and let their axles become the sort of Truthwood understands. Hot pitch waited in kettles across the ceiling like storms in the sky. The wedges under the gate creaked and held. The ram said its word again, then once more, and the left leaf remembered that trees break in storms. It didn't burst. It isn't like the stories. It moved, an inch, then 2. Light forced a line between leaf and post. The bar bowed. The hinges screamed. A boy too near the joint put his hand there to hold the universe together and learned a lesson no one should ever have to learn about hands and doors and the way the world does not care for either. "Back!" I cried, and men obeyed even when obedience hurts someone you can see. The enemy shouted, not in triumph, but in relief, the way a man shouts when a stuck lid finally turns. Hooks came through the line of light and bit the inner face, and the men on the hooks prepared to make a thing that was already happening happen faster. "Now," the captain said, and the sky opened inside the tunnel. Oil fell, then flame, then pain, which is what flame is to men who have not made peace with its behaviour. The hooks let go. The hands holding them did not, and then did. 2 of ours, braced with long forks, shoved the wagons tighter against the gap. For a moment the gate decided to remember us again. We could not buy the whole day. We could buy the hour that lay between this one and the next. We have no shops that sell hours. We pay with work and heat and pieces of ourselves that no one sees leave. "Back to the wall," I said. "They will climb to make the gate true." They did. Ladders came in a rash, our stones grew small, our buckets grew light. Men whose names I can tell you and men whose names I never learned stood, and then knelt and then lay, and in all 3 positions gave us more time than anyone has the right to ask of another. Somewhere in the middle of that breaking hour, Isabel returned to the wall with a basket, and a look that would have made a king reconsider his plans. "Out," I told her, half a laugh and half a plea. "Bread," she said, and moved down the line, setting small rounds of brown into hands that had forgotten what gentle things felt like. A man near me took one, bit, chewed, and cried, the kind of crying you can hide by looking like you hate the bread. She pressed a flask to Etienne's lips. He did not drink. He breathed the smell and found that it was enough to tell his body there were still ordinary things in the world. "You shouldn't be here," I said, cutting 2 ladders in one breath and swinging to shove a third. "You're here," she said simply, and her eyes said 1,000 other things whether she knew it or not. I wanted to kiss her then, helmet and sweat and grit and all. I did not. I placed my hand for a second on the back of hers as she passed, and the touch climbed my arm into my chest and steadied the place where the letter lay. 6. Evening decides. It is fashionable to pretend that battles turn on banners and oaths. They turn when someone on one side believes less than he did a minute ago. The sun had begun to tilt. Our shadows lengthened. The enemy's breath got shorter. Their ram had made a gap and their hooks had preached a sermon, and the gate still had not converted. Their ladders had taught us our edges, and we had moved the edges, and still they had no one on our wall who could stay. A horn called from their rear, the kind of call that means the man with the counting purse has looked at the numbers and shaken his head. The ladders in the west angle stopped coming. The ram crew made one last noisy statement and then decided the sentence was complete. Men backed away from the ditch, their shields kept politely turned toward us, because there is a way to leave that is not fleeing and a way to leave that is, and they chose the first. "They go," Marcus said, and leaned his forearms on the merlon and finally let his shoulders sag. "Thank God and the smiths and the boys who brought water." "And the baker," I said, "because truth should be complete when it can be." We did not cheer. Men who have stood the day know that cheering uses muscles that are needed for other work, like making sure the dark does not eat anyone you would like to see tomorrow. We bound arms, we turned bodies gently from the sun, we wrote lists without writing materials because lists must be made even if only the air hears them. The gate crew set new wedges and sang to the wood the way men sing to mules that have earned their rest. Etienne found a stool and discovered that his body had been bought on credit, and the bill had come due in a quiet wave that made his eyes roll up and his head rest on the bow like it was a pillow. Isabel wiped a smear from my cheek with the fold of her sleeve and made a face at the grit. "You look like a chimney sweep," she said. "You smell like a bakery," I said. "Good," she said. "I'd rather be a bakery in a war than a war in a bakery." I laughed, and the laugh hurt, and that was strange and perfect and exactly the way I wanted the evening to begin. We counted. We named. We carried. We poured water slow into mouths that could not quite remember what to do with it. We laid the fallen in the abbey nave with the cool stone under them, and the coloured windows making gentle arguments about heaven onto their faces. The priest whose books I had exiled to the lane read words he meant and words he hoped to mean soon. When the sun's rim touched the hills, the valley changed colour, the way a bruise turns from blue to yellow. The enemy lit their camp in the far meadow. We lit ours in the courtyards and kitchens and the corners of rooms where men who had not meant to sleep slept sitting up. I climbed the stairs to the east walk and found the place where the morning had paused when the carts went by. The willow near the ditch had not forgiven the horses and would not. The hedges had mended themselves already in the way hedges do when nobody tells them there was a war. The lane had 2 neat ruts in it, from wheels and a scatter of flour that looked like snow that had made a mistake and come to the wrong season. She came to stand beside me. Her hand found the back of my glove and rested there, where the leather is softer, where a man can feel a pulse through cowhide if it is a pulse he has learned to know. "You did not turn back," she said. "You walked toward me," I said. We stood a while saying nothing, breathing like people who have decided that breath is something you keep if you can. From the meadow a hawk lifted into the last light and rode it like a skinny boat. The bells, tired of being brave, were quiet. "Tomorrow?" she asked me softly, not to trap me in a promise, but to test the shape of hope against the air. "Tomorrow," I said, because the word itself is a kind of bread. She turned her face and looked at me in the cast of the evening. There are moments so close to ordinary you can miss them while wishing for the sort that poets steal. I did not miss this one. I unbuckled the chin of my helm and let it hang. She reached up and touched the line it had left on my jaw, and then, as if we had both been standing on a wall and had finally decided to step through the crenel, she kissed me. Quick, honest, certain, the way you drink when you're thirsty and the well is finally right there. "I'm glad you lived," she murmured, practical as ever. "I'm glad you made me need to," I said. We went down then because the day still had work in it. Bread to slice, names to write, children to hush. The night would take the edge off the stones and return our voices to us one by one. Somewhere the smith would sleep on the bench in his shop because the forge never really closes in a town that has seen a ram. Somewhere the priest would find his books and be ashamed that he had been ashamed to put them down. Somewhere Etienne would wake to find he had slept through supper and discover that Isabel had put a loaf by his elbow and a blanket over his shoulders, and that these 2 facts were proof enough of God for the evening. As for me, I took off the last of the armour and set the pieces in their places like the parts of a prayer you learn as a boy and lose and then find again. I wiped the helm clean of flour and ash and the day. I put the letter on the table and read it once more, as if knowing the words could keep them true forever. "If you do not find me," it began, and I smiled because I had. I lay down with the weight of the harness still in my bones and the smell of bread in my hair, and her hand on my chest like a promise you don't say out loud. Outside, the night took our day and made it smaller until it would fit inside a story. If this is that story, know that it was made of inches and breath, and the inches between 2 hands on a wall where love and duty held onto the same stone until evening decided we could let go. And I slept. The morning after bread, they woke the town with ladles on kettles instead of trumpets. It was not ceremony, only the sound people make when they need a bell but have soup. I lay a moment on the pallet with the smell of ash and flour in my hair, and the weight of the harness still in the bones it had visited. For a heartbeat I could not remember which aches belonged to me, and which the day had pressed into me as alone. Then the letter on the table caught a slice of sun, and memory arranged itself like tools on a bench. I found Isabel in the bakehouse courtyard where heat lives even when the world is cool. She was dusted to the elbows, sleeves rolled, hair braided with a ribbon she swore she did not own. Bread rose in ranks on the board like round soldiers that intended no harm to anyone. She pressed her thumb into a loaf and nodded, satisfied, as if the universe had finally kept a promise on time. "You should be sleeping," I said from the doorway. "You should be eating," she answered without looking up, "and then sleeping. Obedience is easier when the Queen issues sensible orders." She snorted at that and dusted flour at me with a flick that would have been flirtation if she had had time for flirtation. "Sit. The first is for the wounded, the second is for the smiths and the masons. The third is for those who held the wall and now pretend not to need food. Captain, you're always the third." "Not today," I said, and stole one from the second tray. She pretended not to see me chewing happiness. We carried baskets between us through streets that wore last night's dust like a shawl. Windows had opened to the morning, voices stepped out onto thresholds and spoke softly as if afraid to wake the hurt. The abbey bell did not ring. The bell rope hung coiled like a tired snake. People blessed it for its silence and blessed the men who had given it the right to be silent. At the forge, the smith lay where he had promised. Across his bench, with his arm crooked under his head, a giant asleep like a child who had wrestled a dragon and now dreamed its scales softer. We did not wake him. We left 2 loaves and a pot of barley coffee on the anvil. Even asleep he smelled it. The corner of his mouth smiled before his eyes did. On the west walk, masons in aprons that had known quieter days set their palms against stone and listened with the kind of ears you learn from fathers. They spoke to each other in a language of taps and shims and chalk lines, and the city, if a place of hedges and orchards and stubborn walls can be called a city, answered them. We left bread at their feet and they nodded thanks without stopping the serious fun of making the world square again. At the abbey, the nave was a cool breath. Light ran in coloured threads across stone like rivers embroidered by grandmothers. The wounded lay in tidy disorder. The priest with the abandoned books moved among them with hands that had remembered what hands were for, lifting, tying, blessing without sermon. He saw me. I saw the shame still flitting around his eyes like a moth that cannot find the way back out. "I left the books," he said, the confession a splinter wanting a finger's attention. "You carried a child," I said, "and the Lord writes his books in children first." He let the splinter out. It did not bleed. He took the bread with both hands and broke it the way he breaks other holy things, and men watched his hands and relaxed, as if the world had returned to a shape it understood. Outside, the gate stood braced, a stubborn jaw set against another day. The bar had been reset, the wedges married to places that loved them. A carpenter's boy planed shims with his tongue between his teeth. He glanced up at me with the look that boys give the men whose stories they've decided to steal later for their own use. I winked and became a man again instead of a story. We spent the next hours doing work that fixes more than hinges. Names were written. The missing was searched for in small places because large places had already given up their answers. Children were found under tables, asleep on sacks of apples, dreams bright and shameless. One old woman, the kind who can make a militia out of grandchildren and soup, organised a line of clean rags and another of laughter, and I never learned which did more good. By noon, the enemy camp had thinned to a shadow on the far meadow. Scouts came back with stories that tasted of dust and certainty. Wagons turned, fires banked, a banner furled. They had taken their counting purse to a safer town. Even the ridge looked relieved to be merely a piece of land again. Marcus found me on the wall with a ledger in his hand that had once been a merchant's tally, and had now become a book of souls for a day. "Numbers," he said softly. "Tell me." "We lost 9, he said. "We keep 3 who will not lift arms again, but who will sit in doorways and teach boys to tie knots and tell them when to stop pulling." I nodded. The 9 had names. Even the 3 had names that were more than their wounds. We said them with the care a man gives to glass. And Etienne, I asked. Sleeping like a cat that has decided the dog is a rumour, Marcus said. Isabel fed him. He pretended to be angry, failed, and asked for another loaf. He tucked the ledger under his arm and looked east, where a ribbon of willow and ditch took a breath. They say you were seen in the wicket lane. They say you rode at 3 mounted men with a practice lance and a belief. I rode at 1, I said. The other 2 merely witnessed. I will correct the poems, Marcus said, deadpan, and then turned serious. Aldrich, we bought a day. There will be a bill. Perhaps not tomorrow. Perhaps not this season. Perhaps when the children we saved are old enough to be fools. But a bill always finds the door. Then we will keep the door braced, I said, and teach the fools to count. He clapped my shoulder once, a weight that said more than words, and left, to learn where a hinge still lied about being tight. The yard that remembers. Toward evening, when the heat withdrew into the day like a tide, I took a poleaxe to the yard. Not to drill anyone, but to retrain a pair of shoulders that had learned some ideas the fight had argued against. Tools teach you. If you listen, they correct you without making you feel corrected. The yard smelled of ash and rope and baked dirt. Children had drawn a hopscotch in one corner with charcoal. Someone had balanced the broken rung of a ladder over 2 barrels and called it a bench. Etienne, predictably, was there before me, his arm bound, his bow across his lap. He had the expression of a boy who had been promoted by accident and intends to keep the job through charm and terror. You should be abed, I said. Master, he replied with solemn insolence. If I lie down any more, my back will become the shape of the pallet and I will never stand straight again. I grunted approval. Show me your breath. He inhaled as if trying to impress the yard with the quantity. Quiet, I said, and showed him. Do not gather it. Let it gather you. He tried again. This time the breath arrived without parade. Good. Show me the bow, I said, and he did. The draw a little ragged, the shoulders a little high, the release not quite a release but an argument. Your arm was injured, I said. Good. Then the bow will teach the other arm to help. We worked without hurry. The yard remembered us. It always does. It holds every foolish hour I spent as a boy learning to place my feet and every patient hour an old captain spent, reminding me that placing feet is not a skill you finish learning. After a while, Etienne stopped watching me watch him and began to watch what his own body was up to. That is when a soldier is born, not when he first bleeds, but when he first sees himself as moving parts that can be aligned into mercy. When the light slanted long enough to make the poleaxe cast a shadow that looked like a giant's quill, I set the haft on the ground and leaned my hands on the head. The weight, which had been a shove all day, became a prop. Beyond the yard the east lane drowsed, hedges polite, the ditch thoughtful, the willow counting its leaves. Isabel came with a pitcher and 2 cups that didn't match. She handed Etienne one with a straight face that did not fool its smirk. He received it like a knight takes a blade and drank like a farm boy takes water. Your priest came by, she told me. He asked if there would be a service for the 9. I told him yes, and that he would not be needed to make us solemn. He will be needed to say names, I said, and to tell us what to do with the part of the day that didn't fit in our hands. She nodded, looking at the yard's dirt the way bakers look at dough when it is almost risen. I will bring loaves. You will always bring loaves, I said, more prayer than compliment. Etienne feigned a yawn you could see from the abbey, thanked us with a nod too big for his neck, and took himself away before we could decide to be tender at him. The yard grew quiet in the way places do when the people who love them stop moving. I set the poleaxe aside and sat on the ladder bench. Isabel sat beside me, hips barely touching, as if the wood between us were the delicate hinge of a gate we had both promised not to slam. The pitcher sweated in her hands. The cup cooled mine. How close? She asked after a time, not to pull a story out of me, but to sand the edge of the unspoken. Close enough to hear the rammer's breath, I said. Close enough to see the men on the hooks decide whether their hair or their duty was more important. Close enough to count the splinters in a ladder rung. Not so close that I forgot your letter. She looked down at my collar where, even now, some corner of wax had printed its small seal onto the linen. I thought I was sending weight, she said softly. I'm glad it was ballast. It was a keel, I said. I would have sailed in circles. You would have found land, she said. You always do. Only because you live on it, I said. And the words were foolish and true at the same time, which is the only way lovers can speak without wasting each other's patience. We sat, the yard sitting with us, the shadows of the merlin stretching like the teeth of a comb. A dog barked twice and then accepted the terms of the evening. Somewhere a mason sang a line of a song and decided not to learn the next verse. The town breathed. We breathed with it. And The reckoning. We held the service at dusk when light forgives stone its hardness. The abbey doors were open, the nave cool. The 9 lay under linen which makes all men equal, and all weight bearable to the eye. Families came not to break, but to be held while breaking. The priest spoke little. He had the wisdom, won yesterday with sweat, to let names do the carrying. He read them slowly, as if the syllables had weight, and he trusted our hands to catch them. A boy, small as a loaf, clung to his mother's skirt and stared at the window, where St. Michael stands forever, deciding to be merciful. I wanted to tell him that the saint always chooses mercy. I do not lie to children. When the last Amen had found its place among the beams, people spilled into the courtyard as water finds a lower terrace. We set tables down their length with bread, cheese, apples that had no business being this sweet after a day like ours. No one toasted. We do not drink to the dead. We drink to the living who will be asked to wake tomorrow and make meaning out of ours. An old soldier I barely remembered from a campaign 10 years old came up and put his one hand on the stump of his other arm as if introducing them. "Captain," he said, and then waited as if the word had more in it, but he could not quite coax it out. "You stood somewhere yesterday," I said. "I can smell the pitch in your hair." He barked a laugh that had the shape of pride and the sound of relief. "I held a fork," he said. "Imagine me, a man who once rode with a banner, pleased as a girl with ribbons because a wagon wheel went where I asked it." "Ribbons and forks are what keep towns," I said. "Banners only keep poets." He liked that. He took a piece of bread, broke it, and slipped half to a child who was not looking. The child discovered the bread later and believed in miracles the way children are allowed to. Isabel moved among them, a queen without title, hand on shoulder here, a whispered joke there, the calculus of care done with speed and accuracy. When she came back to me, her eyes were deep and tired and alive, as if the day had taken a lap around her heart and decided it could not finish in one turn. "They will be back," she said. "Not tomorrow, but men who own rams do not let them sit long enough to rot." "I know," I said. "We will mend the gate. We will deepen the ditch. We will teach the boys to breathe before they draw. We will pray for rain the night before they try the orchard gullies again." She studied my face, searching for the boy who used to pretend to flap dragon wings from the ridge and shout fate down into the fields. "What will you do?" "I will stand where I did," I said, "and I will make certain that the men beside me are standing because they chose to, not because I shouted." I hesitated, felt the weight of a different bill come due. "And I will ask you something that belongs at the end of campaigns and also at the start." "What?" she said, looking squarely at me the way only bakers and surgeons and lovers can. "Stay," I said. "Not the staying you already do with bread and lists and children and priests. The staying that puts your name where mine is, in the ledger, in the house, on the door. Stay where I am, if I am allowed to be where you are." It was a clumsy proposal. I had meant to find a hilltop and a sunset and a bottle saved for best. Instead I had a courtyard that smelled of apples and wool and light sweat and candle ends. A town that needed its heroes to become husbands and wives again, so that children could see the trick with their own eyes. Perhaps that is better. She did not answer at once. The mouth that knows flowers' language and water's temper tasted the word she wanted, and let it rise. A long moment, and then, "Yes," she said, and then quieter, as if to the part of herself that had waited through years of rams and rumours. "Yes." The priest, who was looking for a pail, overheard the syllable and smiled into the pail in case it needed blessing. Marcus, who had the respect to pretend ignorance, clapped Etienne on the shoulder and told him to go check the fletchings in the bowroom now, because this is the moment when incidental errands save a boy from exploding with joy. "Tomorrow," Isabel said to me again, with a new weight in the word that had nothing to do with battle. "We will tell your men who will pretend to be surprised. We will tell the baker who will lecture me about kneading. We will tell the priest who will look at his pail again. We will tell the willow," I said. She laughed. "The willow already knows. X. Vow under glass." We chose the abbey not because we wanted heaven to overhear us more than usual, but because its windows understand vows. Morning poured through saints and lilies and old battles softened by 12 colours. The priest wore the plainest vestment and the widest grin. Marcus stood with a beard he had trimmed like a man going to duel an opinion. Etienne held Isabel's ribbon like a guard holds a street. "Marriage," the priest said, hands open, which is a word for work and also for rest. I had never wanted to wear armour less. I did not, though my bones still carried it. I wore the blue coat with the darn at the elbow where a mother had saved it from a younger, more thoughtless me. Isabel wore linen that knew flower and smiled at it, and a sprig of pear blossom someone had found near the East Lane and brought, believing it unkillable. We spoke the old words. They felt new in the mouth because we had paid for them. My voice shook where I expected it to be brave and steadied where I expected it to break. Her voice did the opposite, and we met in the middle as we always had, in the inch where two truths fit. "Rings?" the priest asked, looking pleased with the idea that metal can mean mercy. We had none. We had not thought to beg the smith, and in any case he would have wept on them, and that would not have made them less holy. "Twine," Isabel said, and the priest, undignified and delighted, produced a length from the pocket where a man of God keeps string for doors that stick and books that think they are birds. He wound it gently around our fingers, spoke, and did not let it snag. When he finished, he breathed on the knot, and it held the way some knots hold because hands have asked them to, not because they are clever. "There," he said, "now the town is married to itself a little more." The congregation, by which I mean the baker and the smith and the carpenter's boy and Ursula, the midwife and 24 others who had paid for seats with sleeplessness, made the sound people make when something fits. Out in the porch, Marcus embraced me in the way men embrace when they have also closed ranks on a wall together. "Now," he said, "when you give foolish orders, perhaps someone at home will teach you to make them wise." "She's been doing that for years," I said. Etienne presented Isabel with a wooden spoon he had carved poorly and with the concentration of a monk. "For when the dough argues," he said. "The dough never argues," she replied gravely. "Only the baker does." "And the captain," Marcus added. "And the captain," she agreed, blushing and weaponizing it. We ate in the courtyard, this time without the hush of grief. The same tables, the same bread, the same apples, now cut and salted. Children ran until their knees remembered last night and requested pity. I stood and watched the hill line and the ridge and the East Lane as a man looks at a field after ploughing, not afraid of work, not proud of it, simply aware of the weight and the weather. The gate creaked once, settling. The braces held like vows in a wind. The willow flicked its leaves the way a horse flicks flies. Somewhere, the hawk of yesterday made a small, satisfied circle that said, "If you could read it, I did what I meant to do." Isabel came to stand at my side and slipped her hand into mine as if the rope still bound us, and we had decided we liked it that way. "Captain," she whispered. "Husband," I whispered back, and the word went through me like a lance turned gentle. The same line, a different purpose. For the rest of the day we did ordinary work with extraordinary gratitude. We counted flour. We measured pitch. We trained boys to breathe and men to step without noise. We taught the gate a new song for the bar. We told 3 grandmothers to rest and endured their mockery. We fixed a hinge that squealed because small mercies matter more the day after soldiers leave. Evening came with the ease of a friend arriving without knocking. We sat on the wall and watched the meadow bruise into purple. The first star let itself be found. The second pretended to be clever and then admitted it was not. The night promised to keep our houses as if they were under its cloak. "You will ride again," Isabel said without accusation. "Yes," I said. but not to find a fight and certainly not to leave one. "And you will come back," she said. "Because you will be here," I said. "Because bread will be here. Because boys with ledgers will be here, and old men with forks and gates that remember trees and windows that forgive us for how we look at ourselves in them. Because this place has decided it is stubborn." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a weight I had learned to carry with perfect eagerness, and the wall did not mind the two of us making it into a bench. When we finally rose to go down, I looked east once more. The lane was quiet. The wicket door, newly planed, shut with a sigh like a satisfied old man. The hedges had begun to knit themselves into new shapes after last night's decisions. The ditch had a frog's voice, and a moon coin resting on it. Every inch of it felt like a promise I could keep. We walked home, our home. The door needed a carpenter's attention. I promised it would get it. She promised to make him do it soon. Inside, the table remembered the place where the letter had lain and made room for it to lie again, now a keepsake instead of a map. We slept. The day slipped into night and refused to tell the dark anything we would not want it to repeat. In dreams, the gate learned to sing, and the willow told jokes that only hedges laugh at. The hawk made its circle and drew us inside it for a time, and when morning came, it found us bound by twine and bread and the better kind of stubbornness, the kind that keeps a wall because it keeps a vow. If the world sends another ram, we will answer. If it sends only weather, we will answer that too. If it sends children, we will teach them inches and breadth, and how to put loaves into hands without asking for thanks. If it sends peace, we will not waste it because we have learned how much work peace requires. This is how a day of battle becomes a life, with practice, with laughter, with doors that shut properly, with windows that make coloured promises, with names said aloud, with the quiet, durable love of a woman who smells like flower and hope, and with sleep, always, at the end of brave days, with sleep. Imagine twilight settling over a field of flattened grass. The sky is the colour of old pewter, and a breeze moves across the ground like someone exhaling. Men sit their horses in a long, deliberate line. Horses snort. Leather creaks. A few banners hang heavy, as though they, too, are waiting for permission to sleep. You might expect sharp trumpet calls or flashy gestures, but what you'd really hear if you sat there quiet and attentive would be breathing. So much breath. From men, from animals, from the land itself cooling under the evening air. In that quiet, a lance feels less like a theatrical prop and more like a fact. 12 feet of dense timber tipped with steel does not invite elegance. It asks for respect. The knight who balances it learns a new kind of patience. He does not hold it tight the way a dancer clutches a partner. He lets it settle into the hollow of his arm and shoulder, a long lever that will transmit force like a whisper that becomes a shout. Hollywood often paints the next moment in polished strokes, two brilliant lines converging, the impact staged, the lances miraculously intact. The truth was rougher and oddly simpler. You didn't so much aim a lance as you steered a moving world of muscle and hooves and inertia toward a point you believed would be there when you arrived. The horse was power, the lance was a funnel, the rider was the hinge between them. Most lances broke. They were made to. The goal wasn't to keep a perfect stick, but to survive the exchange and stay on the horse. Grip too rigidly, and your shoulder becomes the final resting place for the field's momentum. Hold with a measured looseness, and the shock flows through the wood, splitting fibres instead of joints. A first pass, if it succeeded, did its work in seconds. It startled, scattered, opened seams in a formation, told the other side that the ground beneath them was not safe. Then riders let the broken shafts fall away like sticks cracked by a storm, and the battle shifted into a different register, the tempo lowering from a gallop to something closer to a wrestling match conducted on a vast open floor. Part. When men stepped down, the ground is always there, patient and inevitable. To fight on it is to discover the tyranny of reach and the math of leverage. Here, the poleaxe begins to make sense. A poleaxe looks at first like excess: blade, hammer, spike, and a long wooden haft. But in the slow light of real combat, it becomes a tidy answer to a catalogue of problems. People often imagine swords as the crown of medieval weaponry, yet the poleaxe was the quiet workhorse of armoured duels and foot fights. It solved distance and created options. With it, you could invite an approach or deny one. You could hook, pry, shove and tip your opponent off balance. You could strike high like a falling shutter or jab forward like a patient herdsman prodding a stubborn ox. The knights who knew their craft did not whirl. They economised. A left hand crept halfway up the haft, a right hand settled lower, and the body turned as if answering the weight rather than commanding it. The axe blade could bite, yes, but more often it caught and tugged. A knee from behind, an elbow from across, a shield edge, a belt. The hammerhead kissed helmets not to crack them open, but to ring them like bells and change the world inside for a moment. Vision loosened, balance slipping, breath catching. And when a seam appeared, the thin logic of armour that lets a man bend and move, the top spike probed, not frantic, not cruel, simply inevitable. Armoured fighting, up close, looks almost conservative. The movements are small, the intentions are clear, the body protects its breath and its balance first, and everything else is a negotiation conducted in inches. If a foe crowded in too close, the same pole that granted reach could shorten. Hands slid along the haft. The long weapon became a short lever. A hook turned into a bar across a thigh. Everything is leverage, never beautiful, always effective. Part 3. Weight against weight. Think of a bell tower in a quiet town. When the bell strikes, the air is full. The ribs of buildings know the sound. A mace brings that same fullness to the body. It does not need to be heavy, just focused. Flanges and knobs concentrate a swing's energy into a small place and ask the armour to carry the cost. Armour can carry much, but it cannot ferry every blow to nowhere. Something inside receives the message. A mace announces itself not by a single dramatic blow but by a rhythm. Strike, guard, step. Strike, guard, step. Shoulders complain, yes, but the person behind the visor learns to borrow the floor, to let legs and hips feed the swing so arms do not work alone. The target is not always to break. Often it is simply to accumulate. Dense reshaped plates. They turn smooth surfaces into topography. A hammered ridge here refuses the next blade its tidy slide. A helmet deformed even slightly shifts how a head sits inside, and the neck knows about it long before the face does. The warhammer speaks the language of contrast. Hammer face for breadth, beak or spike for precision. A smart fighter moves between them the way a patient gardener knows when to loosen soil and when to dig. You tap to make an opening, then you choose the opening you made. The aim is not glory, it is progress. Breath by breath, angle by angle, you claim terrain measured in the inches around a visor, an armpit, a hip hinge. Part 4. The sword. Unromanced swords are stories. They glimmer in sagas and sit centre stage on posters. In the soft light of practical fighting, they are just tools with a narrow job description. An arming sword in a gauntleted hand has substance, yes, but the armour across from it is an honest critic. Edges that sing in tales clatter in reality. So the fighter adapts. Half-swording feels strange the first time you try it. One hand on the grip, the other on the blade, the weapon turned from a slash into a short, stiff spear. But in armour, it is the polite answer to a blunt question. How do you guide a point precisely through the spaces where a body must stay flexible? You steer it in, patiently, like threading a needle you cannot quite see. Murder strokes, the grim nickname for turning the sword around to use its crossguard and pommel as a bludgeon, sound theatrical but feel practical. You take the heavy parts and make them do the heavy work. A visor bar receives the lesson. A wrist guard hears it. A knee joint negotiates because it must bend and cannot always be armoured into immobility. With the sword, fighting often occurs in bursts. 10 seconds of effort, 5 seconds of assessment. Lungs argue with armour. Sweat chalks the inside of a gorget. The rhythm becomes a kind of honesty. No one fights forever. Not in mail, not in plate, Not while the sun watches and the air warms under steel. Part 5. The Little Blade That Ends. Things daggers are not romantic. They do not stretch a banner in the mind the way a longsword does. They are small punctuation marks at the end of messy sentences. Yet battles, so many battles, ended at dagger distance. A body on the ground in armour is a paradox. So well protected, so unable to move. The downed fighter becomes a combination lock, and the dagger is the person kneeling down to listen for the clicks. The technique has no theatrics. You hold what you must, an arm, a chin, a harness strap, because people cling to life with the same insistence you do. You look for the seam between helmet and collar, or the yielding place under an arm. The blade is not flimsy. It is a wedge meant to find a path. There is no chorus, no spotlight, just the knocking of metal against metal breathing. By the time the dagger becomes necessary, the world has already been narrowed by heat and fatigue to the space that two people can occupy with their limbs tangled. Tournaments wrote rules to police this kind of close final work. Real fighting did not. Not because people lacked imagination or decency, but because survival admits less decoration than a pageant. On the ground, the smallest weapon often had the last word. Part 6. Wrestling in a world of hinges armour works by being strong, where movement is slow and permissive, where movement must be quick. Every place you must bend is a compromise. Grappling turns compromise into strategy. A hand on a visor does not seek to wrench it off. It seeks to lift it just enough to tip balance. A foot hooking a calf does not seek a theatrical sweep. It wants a simple stumble, a moment when a person's weight no longer knows where to go. The goal is not always to throw, often it is to tilt. Inside metal, grappling feels intimate and heavy. Your breath rebounds from the helm and returns to you warmer, a reminder that you are, in fact, in there. You understand your opponent not by seeing him, but by feeling his column's leg, spine, arm, and tracing the lines where pressure can be useful. Every hold has an answer, every answer has a cost. The floor is the judge. Whoever arrives there first, badly, receives the ruling. This is the part the old masters taught with patience because it came closest to certainty. Strikes can be lucky, throws are math. You learn the shapes of advantage, underhook, head control, hip position. You practice how to keep something you've taken and how to make a small gain resemble a cliff to the person below you. When the armour protects from cuts, you use it against its wearer. When the plates distribute force, you use that distribution to shift the whole person. When a gauntlet makes hands clumsy, you use your forearms like wedges. Part 7. A clock measured in breath. The battlefield does not keep time with swords, it keeps time with lungs. A long heavy garment of steel becomes an oven in good weather and a drain in bad. Even a trained body begins to edit its ambitions. The first minute permits grandeur, the second minute asks for prudence, the third minute insists on choices. By 15 minutes the body has voted against pretense and only craft remains. The sensible fighter manages effort the way a shopkeeper manages coin, in small change. Do not spend a full swing when a simple shove will do. Do not chase a flourish when a footstep will solve the problem. Retreat is not shame, it's an investment. Step back to breathe, and you may have breath to step forward again. Those who deny this arithmetic discover that the ground is generous and will accept them without a quarrel. In films, fights stretch like silk unwrinkled by time. In life, they come in knots. There is the knot of the first rush, the knot of bodies pushing, the knot of exhaustion, and sometimes, mercifully, the knot of surrender. Between those knots is slack, and in slack you breathe. Party 8. What the movies. Miss, and why that's okay. Stories have jobs. One job is to entertain, and since we are not children of those fields or students of those guilds, it is understandable that our stories polish what real life leaves rough. The trouble arrives when polish replaces patience, when choreography stands in for craft, when we forget the man inside the helm is not an emblem, but a body with a pulse and a limit. The real art of medieval fighting is less flash than fluency. The fluency of momentum, of weight, of tools used exactly as their shapes suggest. A lance is a message delivered once loudly. A poleaxe is a question posed again and again. What can you reach, move, or open? A mace is a reminder to the bones. A warhammer, a conversation between broad and narrow. A sword is a dialect of precision, most articulate when held near the middle. A dagger is quiet punctuation, final not because it is grand, but because it is close. And yet there is beauty. It's just a different kind. Beauty in efficiency, beauty in restraint, beauty in the knowledge that the person who fights well wastes little of breath, of motion, of hope. It is the beauty of a craftsman who chooses the right tool and uses it for the right job, then stops. Part 9. A soft walk through a day of arms. Let's wander through one imagined day and let it pass like a lullaby. Dawn. Armour laid out not as a costume but as parts cuisses for thighs, greaves for shins, the gorget for the tender neck. Each piece buckles with an unshowy click. The weight, once gathered, spreads and settles. You discover how helpful distribution is. 2 pounds here, 3 pounds there, none of it unbearable alone, all of it insistent together. Mid-morning, a practice yard. A poleaxe rests against a rail. You pick it up and feel the balance. You do not swing. You place the bottom tip on the earth and lean, letting the weapon tell your shoulders where it wants to be held. You walk a step and feel the haft become a line through your body, shoulder to hand, hand to ground. When you raise it, it rises without complaint. You coil your hips, not your wrists. You breathe. Noon. A horse in the shade. You touch its neck. It is warm, a furnace banked. The saddle is not elegant. It is a tool. You put your feet where they belong and remember that confidence is not grip but posture. The lance comes up. The world lengthens by 12 feet. You point it nowhere, then lower it slightly until the point is something the air can understand. You move forward and learn again that the horse is the river and you are steering a boat. Afternoon. A friend holds a shield. You do not charge. You pace toward him, then plant one foot and thrust the lance as if announcing yourself at a distant door. It jars. You do not cling. You allow. You step back. You do it again. After a handful of tries, the lance is worn. Your arm is not. You smile because you have just learned the first small lesson that saves shoulders. Evening. The yard's emptying, the tools finding their corners. You sit on a bench and unbuckle yourself from the day. Without the armour, the air is feather-light. Without the helm, the evening breeze is cool dialogue across your cheeks. You drink water and hear your swallow locate itself in your throat, unimpeded. You learn what you needed to learn, that the fighting day is a fabric with strong threads, and those threads are breath, leverage, and kindness to the body that carries you. Night. You sleep. In your sleep, no banners whip and no trumpets call. The only sound is your own steady respiration. The field will be there tomorrow, and so will the tools. But tonight, you rest with the knowledge that no weapon is magical, and no technique is heroic. They are just solutions to human problems. How to move weight, how to find a seam, how to conserve effort. The stories can keep their shine. You can keep your breath. Part X. The truth that settles. If you lifted the lid on myth and peered into the plain truth of armoured fighting, you would not find disgrace. You'd find practicality. Knights did not perform dances. They solved puzzles, fast ones, urgent ones, but puzzles nonetheless. The puzzle pieces were simple. A long stick that breaks, a long tool that hooks, a short tool that dents, a blade that probes, a small blade that finishes. And the great constant beneath every piece was the same. A person, tired and hopeful, trying not to be overwhelmed by heat, by fear, by the hands and steel shaping the space around them. And perhaps this is why the subject pairs so well with sleep. To understand medieval combat, you do not need to be thrilled. You need to be calm. Calm is how you notice the details. Calm is how you hold a weapon loosely enough to survive the impact. Calm is how you step back when your lungs request a pause. Calm is how you accept that much of life is leverage of time, of energy, of attention. Calm is what remains when spectacle leaves the room. So let the myths go quiet now. Let the adorned images of endless duels fade into the edge of the mind like lanterns moving away down a road. What remains is the softer shape of truth, that battles ended quickly, that bodies insisted on limits, that the earth claimed whoever forgot to breathe. What remains is not shame, but a gentler respect for the people who did difficult work with ordinary means. When the sun has barely climbed above the rooftops, the sound that wakes the training yard is not shouting but metal sighing. Somewhere, a hammer meets an anvil, and the air vibrates like a heartbeat carried through iron. The smell of quenched steel-sharp, clean, almost sweet floats out of the smithy door. This is where every night's story begins, not in glory but in rhythm. Inside the forge, an armourer stands bare-armed in the heat, sweat running in shining lines along his forearms. He lifts a sheet of glowing metal with tongs, turns it like bread on a hearth, and strikes. The ring of each blow is measured, not violent. A breastplate is not born from rage but from patience, and the good smiths know that sound is language. Too high, and the metal resists. Too low, and it deadens. Somewhere between those tones lies cooperation, and that is where craftsmanship lives. A future knight, still young, waits outside, watching the orange glow paint the walls. He's been told that the forge teaches humility. Armour is heavy even before you wear it. It begins as weight in the hands of others. Every rivet, every hinge, every curve remembers the hand that shaped it. When at last he's allowed to touch the finished pieces, he feels warmth still trapped inside the steel, as if the armour has a pulse of its own. The lesson of the yard. Later, when daylight turns the yard to dust and glare, the clatter of training begins. There are no spectators, no applause, only the dull sound of wood striking wood, a rhythm like distant drums. The young men practice not to look fierce but to learn economy. Every wasted motion is a small betrayal of endurance. A master-at-arms walks among them, cane in hand, armour dented from decades of instruction. Breath, he says. Always breath first. He makes them hold their weapons still until the shaking in their arms quiets. Only then may they move. One step, one swing, one exhale. The sword is not for showing strength. It is for keeping rhythm between body and air. The first week teaches that strength lies in alignment. A swing is not an act of muscles. It is the collaboration of bones. The second week teaches that courage is not noise. It is silence that doesn't break. By the third week, they learn the secret their stories never told them, that fighting is more about listening than speaking. You listen to distance, to the hiss of fabric, to the brief inhale that signals intent. Even armour makes small voices, hinges whisper, chain links rustle, and a trained ear reads them like text. When the master demonstrates, his blade barely moves. He lifts, turns, stops. The students blink, expecting more, but his opponent is already off balance. It is not magic. It is geometry slowed down until understanding can keep up. Armour as companion. When the day comes to wear the full harness for the first time, the young knight discovers a new form of conversation. The armour answers every gesture. It complains if the elbow bends wrongly, grinds if the hip turns too far, forgives if the back stays straight. The weight, once feared, distributes itself. After 10 minutes, it becomes a tide around him. After an hour, it becomes another heartbeat. Inside the helm, sound changes. The world is smaller, nearer. Your own breathing fills the hollow space and becomes company. Through the slit of vision, the yard seems framed like a painting. Every movement outside looks deliberate, slowed. This is how real combat felt, compressed, echoing, measured by the seconds between breaths. A squire helps tighten the final straps. Leather pulls, metal locks. He tests a few steps, each one an experiment in balance. The world does not feel slower. He does. That is the revelation. Armour does not remove speed. It demands intention. Every step must be chosen. The discipline of stillness. Before battle practice, the knights stand in rows. The master tells them to hold position for as long as possible without shifting their feet. Minutes pass. The temptation to fidget becomes unbearable. Yet this stillness is training too, the preparation for the waiting before a charge, for the timeless space between hearing hooves and feeling impact. When they finally move, their strikes are slower than before but more honest. The muscles that once burned now conserve effort. The fight, when it comes, lasts a handful of heartbeats. Then the master raises his hand and silence folds back over the yard. He reminds them that no real encounter lasts long. Victory belongs to those who pace themselves, who know that control is a kind of mercy. Weapons as teachers. In the evenings, they practice with tools that history remembers poorly. The poleaxe, the hammer, the dagger. Each carries a lesson about limits. The poleaxe teaches reach without waste. How distance is measured not in feet, but in timing. The hammer teaches truth of contact. How energy must travel cleanly through the whole body. The dagger teaches finality, that there is a line where choice ends and consequence begins. They work slowly, deliberately, like calligraphers drawing strokes. Sometimes they stop mid-movement and freeze, analysing posture and balance. If a foot is wrong, the master corrects it with the gentlest tap of his cane. Precision now will be survival later. The younger ones tire quickly. They sweat, stumble, mutter apologies. The master shakes his head not unkindly. Armour forgives clumsiness only once, he says. Then he walks away, leaving the sentence to finish itself in the echo of their exhaustion. Evening reflections. After practice, the sun lowers until the forge windows glow again. Knights sit in a half-circle, removing gauntlets, rubbing wrists. The sound of leather unwinding is soft, almost domestic. They talk about nothing important. Food, weather, the stubborn horse that refused to jump. But under those words lives gratitude. Another day finished, another day unbroken. The young knight leans back against a wall. His breath finally slows. He looks at the armour pieces lined beside him, each shaped by someone's patience, each dent a quiet note in the symphony of learning. Tomorrow he will polish them, not to make them shine, but to remind himself that care is part of survival. The steel reflects him in fragments, an eye here, a hand there. He realises that's fitting. No one ever sees the whole self inside a helm. The night falls in layers. Somewhere beyond the yard, crickets start their patient chorus. The last spark in the forge dies, and the smell of iron cools into the air. The boy, almost a knight, now rests his head against his knees and listens to his own heartbeat echo inside his chest plate. It is not a drum of war, but a metronome for living. The knight has a way of teaching physics gently. When wind moves across a field, it doesn't argue with each blade of grass. It passes through, it leans the stems, it becomes visible in what it touches. Medieval combat beneath the noise followed the same patient rules. A strike is not merely a swing. It is borrowed ground, transferred weight, and time made into a line. Momentum explained softly. Imagine you're standing with a poleaxe resting like a shepherd's staff. Your feet are not statues, they are roots that can lift and replant in better soil. When you decide to move, you do not start with shoulders or elbows. You begin below the waist, where the great quiet engines live. You nudge the floor through your heels, feel that nudge rise into your hips, then into your spine, and finally into your hands. A good strike looks as if the weapon moved itself. In truth, you introduced a suggestion to the ground, and the ground answered through you. Momentum is kind in one way and severe in another. It forgives weaker arms if the body aligns, but it demands control when the tool meets resistance. A blade that glides through empty air wants to continue. A blade that meets a helm wants somewhere to send its remaining energy. If you have not offered it a path into your stance through your opposite foot down into earth, then it asks your joints to pay the bill. That is how wrists complain, how elbows ache, how breath gets stolen. Knights learn to treat force like water in a channel. You open gates and close gates, never all at once, never in panic. A lance held too rigidly turns a rider into a dead end. Held with the right softness, it becomes a conduit. Energy arrives, is acknowledged, and is passed on. The same is true of maces and swords, less about raw might, more about where the weight will go after the moment of meeting, edges, points, and broad faces. Each weapon designs a conversation. Edges ask for sliding contact, points ask for straight answers, broad faces ask to push and settle. A sword's edge prefers to move along a surface, to travel, to introduce a line of pressure that continues through the finish of the movement. Against hard plate, edges sing but seldom persuade. They are better poets than negotiators. So the fighter turns to points, to the clean sentence of a thrust, guiding a stiff line into the spaces where armour cannot be absolute. A hammer face is a palm. It arrives, flattens slightly, spreads the moment across a small town of steel. A beak or spike is a knuckle. It arrives with intent, concentrating the same movement into an argument the plate cannot entirely dismiss. Smart hands do not marry one approach. They move between them, breadth to unsettle, point to puncture, breadth again to keep the world off balance. The poleaxe unites these choices. It is a grammar book with many pages, all written in the same hand. You can hook and pull, then slide into a hammer kiss, then turn the top spike forward to punctuate the sentence you just began. The physics are constant, only the diction changes. Angles, not just power. Think of a door that sticks. Push straight and it refuses. Push slightly upward, while pulling the latch, and it glides. Armour is a city of doors and latches. The armpit must open, the elbow must hinge, the hips must cooperate with the stride. Angles are the keys. A downward strike that arrives at the angle of a roof has two jobs. First, to find an edge that can slide and redirect. Second, to push the opponent's balance diagonally into a place their feet cannot support. Even when a blow cannot bite, it can steer. Then, when the opponent complies, usually against their will, the next question is a point inserted where a plate lifts from leather, or where rings of mail cannot lay perfectly flat. A thrust straight onto a visor invites refusal, but a thrust that begins slightly off-centre, then curves like a question mark at the last instant, has more manners and more success. You do not win an argument with a helm, you persuade the gap beside it. The gentle arithmetic of distance is a budget, and impatient fighters overspend. There is the very far lances and arrows measure that space, and there is the far polearms, long and steady. Then the near, sword at half length, a mace that wants to be introduced to a helm, a hammer that prefers a handshake. Finally, the very near, where grappling begins and the dagger takes notes. The wise learn to travel between these economies without paying a tax in panic. Step in, ask a question, step out, breathe, count again. At far distance, you are a builder placing beams across a gap. At near distance, you are a cabinet maker fitting edges so snugly that air can't pass. What costs energy at one range saves energy at another. What is clumsy out there is elegant in here. So a good fighter does not marry a single measure of space. They court distance as it changes, offering and withdrawing with the calm of a tide. Formations, felt from the inside from above on a hill or in a painting. Formations look like shapes, lines, wedges, blocks. From inside, they feel like breath patterns shared among many chests. A shield wall stands not because wood and iron grow roots, but because each person becomes a rib in a larger lung. The secret is timing, the collective inhale that holds, the collective exhale that moves, the agreed pause that replaces cleverness with agreement. In a line of infantry, the polearms up front are not simply pointy sticks. They are the yard's lessons brought to scale. The first rank points forward. The second rank sets their hafts above shoulders like rails. The third watches and waits to replace or push. None of this is frenzied. It is slow carpentry performed by many hands at once. A charge that looks uncontrollable from the outside may, from the inside, feel like walking while carrying a long table. Everyone lifts, everyone steps, everyone sets it down together. Cavalry from within is a series of small negotiations. Horses do not love to press into a forest of points. They prefer space, a lane, a reason. So a commander is less a shouter of orders and more a finder of seams, searching the enemy line for a breath taken at the wrong time. The charge that matters is the one that arrives when bodies on the other side are inhaling, when shields are lifting, when feet are light. Then the lance becomes the letter that arrives exactly when the recipient's hands are full. Heat, weight, and the politics of breath. We speak of armour as weight, but its most persistent argument is heat. Steel shields you from edges and points. It does not grant your skin a breeze. Under a helmet, the air becomes yours and yours alone, warmed, breathed again. The body negotiates with this climate like a diplomat who knows when to push and when to sit. Rest is not laziness, it is logistics. A commander who forces constant motion spends his army's breath the way a reckless lord spends coin at a feast. Better to accumulate short pauses, to grant stillness to the places where it will repay you, in steadier grips, in clearer eyes, in legs that have one more strong step when it matters. Water too is physics. It moves through men into effort and back out into the dust. A canteen is a weapon as surely as a mace, because it allows the mace to be lifted yet again. The ancients understood this, which is why the simplest scenes squires with buckets, boys running skins along a line set quietly beneath the stories and hold them up. Terrain, the silent collaborator. Ground is never neutral. A slope advocates for one side, mud advocates for no one. Grass slick with dew bargains with footwork. Cairns of old stones whisper against horseshoes. A smart fighter reads the land as a second opponent or a shy ally and moves accordingly. In soft earth, wide footwork wastes energy. Shorter steps are coins saved. On stubble left from harvest, the souls must learn to listen, each stalk a tiny reed instrument underfoot. In a shallow streambed, weight goes first to the ball of the foot, then lowers gently to the heel so the water is allowed to leave instead of protesting. Trivial details? They are the staircase down which large men quietly fall, or the rail by which they go safely. Signals and the music of order. Commands in the field are not full sentences. They are beats. A horn that calls a retreat does not need eloquence. It needs to arrive precisely on the offbeat when the enemy expects your lunge. A banner dipping is not art. It is a hand raised across a crowded room. Language itself is too slow, so armies rely on music and gesture, those old partners. Even the units of time are musical. 15 seconds of exchange, 5 to breathe, a minute to reform, a moment to pivot the line, an hour at most for the business of breaking and holding. Beyond that, bodies protest in ways commanders cannot overrule. A battle is a score with rests marked clearly in ink you can't always see until you are forced to stop and take them. The calm eye within the storm. Every engagement has a still place, not always at the centre, sometimes at the edge where a reserve waits, sometimes inside a helmet where a fighter counts. If you could place a candle there, its flame would barely tremble. People imagine that bravery is the absence of fear. Those who fought know it is the acceptance of fear without speed. You let the feeling enter, sit in the chair, and say nothing. Then you continue with the next small task. In this quiet, choices become narrower and better. Do I step left? Do I change the angle by a finger's width? Do I hold my breath 1 second longer before thrusting? Great outcomes often hinge on these small permissions granted by calm. A calm person grants themselves time. Time grants them angles. Angles grant them outcomes that look like luck to those who hurried. The unseen workers. Leather, rivets, and care armour. Fails most often not from a mighty blow but from neglect. A strap dries and cracks. A rivet loosens. Padding compacts. Then, at the wrong moment, a piece shifts and admits a suggestion from the outside world. Squires, therefore, are physicists too, tenders of forces, minders of how weight meets flesh. At day's end, oil enters the conversation. Cloth rubs along a blade not to worship it, but to remove the day's unhelpful grit. Padding is hung, not tossed, because shape remembers. Leather drinks tallow and becomes patient again. These tasks are lullabies sung to tools. They do not ask for applause, but battles depend on them in the quiet way that lungs depend on ribs. Horses, partners in the equation. A horse is not a vehicle. It is a friend who agrees to carry your decisions. Its physics are not yours. 4 legs, a hinge of a back, a crown of ears that read the world before you do. You do not force a horse into the needle's eye between 2 enemy lines. You invite it by showing that space exists and is safe enough to pass through. Your hands on the reins are not fists. They are translators. Weight again is conversation. Your weight, the saddles, the armours. Together they mean something to the animal's muscles, to its breath. So you distribute, you seat yourself, you learn to move with rather than on. A lance angled slightly higher spares a neck. A stirrup adjusted by a hole spares a tendon. Little mercies compound, and the horse gives you back more than you knew you asked for. Morale, the mathematics of many one-person's spine, can become a column for those beside him. Morale travels like heat radiating, absorbing, equalizing across a line. It is physics of a subtler kind, the conversion of uncertainty into motion or stillness, depending on how nearby hearts behave. Drums help, so do familiar voices, so does the sight of a banner that has, in quiet hours, been stitched by careful hands. The mind decides to keep lifting the shield because it remembers who lifted the needle, who tied the knots. Human things bind human endurance better than slogans. Pauses that save lives. It is fashionable in stories to pretend fatigue does not exist. In the ledger of reality, rest has a victory column all its own. A commander who calls a halt does not steal bravery. He buys accuracy. He buys hands that close properly, feet that step where intended, eyes that sort friend from foe. 15 breaths against a wall, visor tilted to catch air, such a small thing. But in the next engagement, the same person lifts their poleaxe and places its shadow exactly where it must be, to frighten rather than merely alarm. Fewer wasted strikes, fewer beautiful mistakes. Rest is not retreat, it is rehearsal inside the lungs. The aftermath, care in a world of edges battles, and not when the last shout fades, but when hands attend to bodies. Bindings, water, clean cloth. A dent is lifted with a wedge and a mallet. Padding is rearranged. A cut is pressed until it agrees to be smaller. Even the act of removing armour is physics, the careful sequence that allows weight to leave without pulling joints out of true. There is kindness here that stories miss. Enemies carry each other off the same patch of ground because heat and breath are loyalties that outrank banners once the shouting is done. A cup of water tastes the same to everyone. The dagger that terrified at midday becomes a knife that trims a strap for a sling by evening. Tools, after all, do not know the day's politics. They only know the shapes they can help. Ransom, custom, and the arithmetic of survival. Not every fallen knight died. Many were taken for ransom, a strange economy that turned skill into currency and spared lives when coin could speak. This too is physics fighting hard enough to win, not wildly enough to ruin what might later be traded. The dagger, so absolute in some moments, becomes a negotiable idea in others, when a name, a family, a fortune complicate the simple geometry of victory. To modern eyes this can seem contradictory. Mercy after ferocity, calculation after urgency. But in a world where armour equalised many of the most lethal edges, the struggle often flowed toward grappling, pinning, and then deciding what the end should mean. A life preserved could later buy freedom for others. A captive returned could become a letter of peace between houses. Even war then bent occasionally toward math that protected futures. What endurance actually feels like. Words like stamina and endurance are abstractions until you wear steel and heat at the same time. Then endurance is the decision to keep your jaw loose so your breath can leave freely. It is the trick of dropping your shoulders between exchanges so your traps don't turn your neck into a vice. It is remembering to unclench your toes so balance remains available. You learn tiny rituals. 2 short breaths through the nose, 1 longer through the mouth. 1 step back that resets the stance without signalling fear, The habit of noticing whether your left hand is gripping harder than your right, and if so, inviting it to soften. These small courtesies to your own body are more valuable than bravado. They allow you to fight as if you are not at war with yourself. Learning to lose. Well, so you can win tomorrow, craft includes the art of retreat. To leave a field in order rather than in fragments is to win time, and time decides more than any single charge. Knight studied how to disengage, how to drop the point of a polearm into the earth for a pulse of resistance while stepping back, how to pivot the shield so that a retreating step looks like a small reset rather than an invitation, how to show the enemy a shape that says we are going, not we are fleeing. In the calm telling, this sounds unheroic, but heroes who cannot leave are also heroes who cannot return. The best veterans think in cycles, not moments. They preserve the line, the tools, and the breath that will be needed when the sun decides to rise again. Why this belongs in a bedtime story? Because understanding replaces fear with comprehension. When we realize that even in chaos there are rules, we sleep better. Force has paths. Breath has rights. Tools have purposes aligned with their shapes. Once you know these things, the loudest scenes in memory grow softer edges. Tonight, if your mind revisits banners and hooves, let the images soften. See the lance not as a lightning bolt, but as a tide that comes once and returns to sea. See the poleaxe not as a reaping blade, but as a multi-tool used by a careful craftsperson who moves at the speed of reason. See the sword held at mid-blade like a short staff, the hand steady, the breath measured. See the dagger as punctuation near the end of a sentence that would otherwise run on too long. Let distance become budget, angles become keys, and rest become wisdom. If you listen closely, even now you might hear the far forge, the single hammer finding the note where iron agrees to change shape. It's the same note the body searches for in the yard, the same note the mind finds when fear quiets. You're safe here. The lesson is simple and therefore deep. Conserve, align, breathe. The old masters did not need prettier words. The room smells of dust, oil, and old ink. A single candle wavers on the desk, its halo sliding over pages written in hands long gone. Each page is a conversation across centuries between teacher and student, between movement and memory. These are the Fechtbücher fight books written not for glory but for remembering. The pages that moved. A young knight studies them by the thin light. On the parchment, drawings show two figures forever frozen mid-motion. One turns a blade sideways, another lowers a shoulder, both balanced like dancers who forgot to smile. The notes in the margins are half poetry, half geometry. Step left when the line of danger points right. Feel the weight before you see it. There is no boasting here, no promise of invincibility, only understanding. Each movement is a paragraph, each guard a sentence that waits for its reply. The knight traces a finger over the ink, whispering the names like prayers. Ox for the high guard, Flug for the plough, Alba for the fool who tempts an opening. He learns that the fool is not foolish at all. It is the stance of patience disguised as vulnerability. Translating motion into quiet. To practice, he stands in the still air of the training hall. He raises the sword to ox high, angled, protective, then flows down to flug, the point toward the ground but ready to rise like a sprouting seed. Each motion asks a question of balance. How little strength can achieve stability? How little effort can contain purpose? The old masters insisted that one must feel through the bind. It means to recognize the opponent's intention by pressure alone, through the touch of blades, without sight. That kind of awareness cannot be forced. It must be listened into being. For bedtime minds, this lesson belongs beyond combat. It is the art of staying receptive even when resistance hums under your palms. The armor's evening routine. After study comes care. Armor, like a loyal friend, asks for small kindnesses before sleep. Oil the hinges, check the rivets, dry the leather where sweat has written its own salt lines. A torchlight glints across each curved breastplate, pauldron, vambrace. and the room fills with tiny reflections, as if a dozen quiet moons had taken shelter there. A squire hums softly while working. He knows the order by heart. Remove, inspect, wipe, anoint. If he finds a crack, he marks it with chalk for morning repair. These rituals are older than memory, older than the wars themselves. They are the bridge between chaos and calm, the transformation of violence back into craft. To fall asleep near polished steel is to see yourself multiplied in tiny curved worlds. The knight sometimes catches his own reflection and hardly recognizes it. The same face that had shouted commands a few hours earlier now looks tranquil, almost fragile. It reminds him that courage and weariness share the same features, depending on the light. Camp before battle night on campaign is not the roaring camp of stories. It is a slow river of small sounds. A horse stamping, armour settling, distant murmurs fading into the wind. Somewhere, a cook's fire sighs as wood turns to ember. Men talk softly about home, about prices of grain, about the smell of the sea they once saw. The talk keeps fear at the right distance. In one tent, a priest walks quietly, offering blessings with a voice more tired than holy. He knows tomorrow's field will not care about sermons, but people sleep easier when words of peace still hang above them. The knight thanks him, not because he expects miracles, but because the sound of faith, any faith, is softer than the night wind. Dreams in metal. When sleep comes, it comes in layers. First, the weight of the day leaves the shoulders, then the hum of vigilance fades from the ears. Inside the tent, the armour stands assembled on a wooden frame, shaped like an empty man. It gleams faintly, catching the candle's last sigh. For a moment it looks alive, waiting, breathing, but it's only stillness, the mirror of exhaustion. Dreams drift through the camp. Hooves, echoing on invisible ground, childhood rivers reflecting stars, half-forgotten voices calling names that no longer belong to soldiers. The mind rehearses and releases, preparing in secret what daylight will demand openly. Even in dreams, the rhythm of training persists. Step, turn, breathe, listen. Sometimes a dream shows the strike landing perfectly, effortlessly. Sometimes it stops before impact, teaching mercy. The dawn's contract. Before sunrise, the world negotiates with itself. Fog curls low, tents drip with dew, and the grass waits to be flattened again. A bird sings the same note twice, as if testing the acoustics of the coming day. Squires move between rows, whispering, checking straps, pouring cold water over hands that tremble slightly but still remember their work. The night rises, pulls on padding that smells faintly of smoke and tallow. Each buckle clicks like punctuation. There is no rush, only order. He accepts the helmet last. When it settles, the outside world muffles and the inside becomes a private chapel of breath. He can hear his own pulse and nothing else. Then, in that hush before the first horn, he does something the chronicles never mention. He closes his eyes and smiles. Not from bravado, but from gratitude for the weight that centres him, for the craft that protects him, for the calm that still belongs to him before the noise begins. The science of courage. Courage is not heat. It is temperature maintained. It is the art of keeping your internal weather mild while storms gather. Every fighter has their trick. A small prayer, a rhythm tapped against the palm, a picture of home hidden under cloth. These are thermometers for the soul. Historians call this morale. The fighters called it simply holding steady. And holding steady in every century depends less on speeches than on breath. The man who breathes well thinks well. The man who thinks well lives. That law is older than metal and more reliable than any oath. The first horn. The first sound is not a shout, but a horn calling from far away low, uncertain, like an animal remembering its voice. It rolls over the misted ground, and every man who hears it exhales. The day has begun, not suddenly, but completely. Some kneel, others check straps that have already been checked twice. Leather creaks the way trees creak. Before wind warning, not complaining. The knight feels his armour cool from the night's dew. Each buckle is a note in a familiar melody. One for the wrist, one for the elbow, one for the heart. The metal hugs him with yesterday's dent still speaking quietly along its surface. He mounts. The horse shifts its weight as if remembering how both of them once moved more freely. The waiting line. Before battle, there is waiting. The longest part of any fight. Horses stamp, tails swish, flies circle like slow sparks. The commander rides the line, his voice a calm metronome. Hold the interval. Breathe through your nose. See the ground. Men nod, because they already know, but need to hear it again. Ritual makes courage mechanical. Across the field, banners wake one by one, reds, blacks, silvers, each trembling in the same breeze that chills the sweat on necks. The two lines face each other like mirrors not yet convinced they're different. The slow beginning. When the signal comes, it isn't loud. It is a flag dropping, a collective inhale. The horses move first, at a walk, then a trot, then a canter. The world becomes rhythm and thunder. Hooves pound heartbeat into the soil. Every muscle inside every rider joins the same cadence. The knight lowers his lance. It feels less like aggression and more like release. The target A-shape, not a man, swells in his narrow window of sight. There is the briefest flicker of sun on steel and then impact. The sound is not dramatic. It's a blunt punctuation, a syllable of wood breaking and air rushing out. The lance splinters as intended. The shock runs through the shaft into his shoulder, then harmlessly down into the saddle. The horse surges onward, taught by generations that forward is safety. By the time the knight reins in, his weapon is half the length it was. He lets it fall. The opening movement is done. On foot, he dismounts into mud that takes the imprint of his greaves like a scribe pressing wet clay. The world has changed scale. Everything is closer, louder, heavier. He draws the poleaxe. The weight steadies him, the balance like a pendulum returning to centre. Around him, noise becomes geography. Clangs to the left, cries to the right, a strange silence just behind his own breath. He moves through it as through deep water, each step a conversation between armour and ground. Opponents are no longer distant shapes, but neighbours encountered too suddenly. The first exchange is almost polite. A hook catching a shield rim, a shove, a pushback, a step aside. The second is less polite. A hammerhead finding a helm, the recoil humming through his palms. He does not think about winning. He thinks about balance, the invisible line that decides whether he falls or stays. The rhythm of endurance minutes melt into fragments. 10 seconds of motion, 5 of stillness. The body writes its own metronome. Inhale before striking. Exhale when weight returns to the heels. Somewhere behind, someone shouts a name. Somewhere ahead, someone stops making noise at all. It is not horror. It is simply subtraction. A blow glances off his pauldron and rings through his ribs like a bell inside a tower. He steps back, checks breath still there, steady enough. The poleaxe feels heavier, but also truer, like a friend who no longer needs explanation. He remembers the forge, the hammer finding the right note. He finds it now in each measured swing. The centre collapses. There is no clear moment when order turns to confusion. The line folds, reforms, folds again. Men become individuals, each fighting inside a shrinking bubble of awareness. At this distance, swords finally appear shorter, quicker, pragmatic. Half-swording, grappling, the hiss of blades meeting gaps. A dagger finishes what strength began. Yet even here, beneath shouts and grinding steel, there is structure. Each motion still answers gravity. Each heartbeat still consults breath. Physics continues faithfully while emotions forget themselves. The sound of retreat. Then a new sound enters, a trumpet higher, thinner, insistent. The recall. He hears it, feels it more than trusts it. Those who can disengage do. Those who cannot yield to the ground's authority. Retreat is not chaos, it is exhalation after too long a hold. The knight steps backward, not running, counting steps as he has counted breaths all his life. Behind him, others form a loose wall. The noise fades in increments. Even the horses waiting at the rear seem to understand that the tide has turned. After the noise, silence arrives like rain on warm dust, soft, filling every space left empty by sound. Smoke hangs low, the air tastes of metal and wet earth. Somewhere a crow calls once, testing the air. Men kneel, not out of reverence, but because knees are the body's oldest language for rest. He removes his helmet. The world rushes back in, wind, light, distance. For a moment he forgets to stand. A squire finds him, offers water. He drinks without ceremony, half of it spilling down his chin, and laughs quietly. Laughter is breath that survived. The small mercies. The wounded are gathered first. Daggers become tools again, cutting straps, freeing limbs. Someone hums an old tune-wordless circular soothing. It passes from one throat to another until the field sounds almost like evening work in a village. The noise of tending, not fighting. The knight helps lift a helm from a fallen friend and discovers the face beneath still breathing. He smiles, a small, tired miracle. Tomorrow, perhaps, they will mend their armour together and polish the new dents, as if they were signatures on a shared page. Evening light. By dusk, the field is unrecognisable. The banners hang slack, the horses graze, and the sky turns the colour of old bronze. Fireflies appear over puddles, unbothered by history. Someone starts a fire. Someone else stirs what's left of supper. The living feed the living. He sits, legs stretched, watching smoke rise. Around him, conversation returns soft, almost domestic. They speak not of victory but of temperature, of missing gloves, of how the stars look cleaner after battle. He listens more than he speaks. Silence, he's learned, has better stories. The weight set down. When the time comes to remove the armour, it feels like untying from gravity. Piece by piece the burden leaves. Helm, gorget, breastplate, gauntlets. Each thud on the ground is a small thank you. Underneath, his shirt clings with salt. His skin carries the map of the day's labour. He lies back on the earth, staring upward, and the sky seems impossibly wide. For the first time he notices crickets again, distant laughter from the tents, the slow pulse of the campfire. He thinks of the manuals, the lessons, the endless drilling of balance and breath. All of it led here to this quiet, this survival, this ordinary miracle of still being able to watch the stars. He closes his eyes. The breath goes in, the breath goes out. The armour cools beside him like a sleeping animal. The field, once loud, has joined the rhythm of night. And somewhere, perhaps, a storyteller begins to whisper, softly enough for the tired to dream, that real knights fought not for spectacle, but for the next sunrise. At dawn, the battlefield looks almost peaceful. Mist folds over the ground like a blanket drawn to hide what happened. A few ravens hop among the armour pieces, curious, not cruel. The air smells of dew again, and that feels like forgiveness. The night wakes stiff and slow. Each bruise argues for attention, but none loudly. He rises, finds water, splashes his face. The surface of the bucket reflects him in ripples, a face less proud, more human. When he blinks, the image smooths, and for a heartbeat he sees the boy who first picked up a wooden sword years ago in a yard behind his father's house. Nearby, squires and servants move through the quiet field, collecting what can still serve. Weapons, armour plates, a torn banner, a half-broken saddle. The rhythm of tidying has replaced the rhythm of combat. It is the same motion, but softer now, a continuation without violence. The counting. Then comes the accounting, names read aloud, answers given, silences marked. It is not ceremony but necessity. Each voice that answers makes the air lighter, each silence bends it heavier. No one cries yet. Tears belong to evening when there is room for them. The knight listens as others speak, and when his own name is called, he answers simply, "Here." That single syllable feels immense, a small stone added to the wall of the living. He looks toward the horizon, not to avoid the moment, but to remember there is still one. Tending the wounded. The healers' tents stand apart, filled with murmurs and the smell of herbs. There is no rank in here, no armour allowed. Men lie side by side, some whispering prayers, others sleeping with the stillness of trees after wind. The sound of cloth tearing for bandages has a strange grace to it. The knight lends his hands where he can, holding, fetching water, binding. The weight of another man's arm on his shoulder is different from the weight of a weapon. This weight trusts him. When one wounded soldier grips his gauntlet and whispers, "Thank you," the words land deeper than any cheer he has heard on the field. Reforging life days pass. The forge returns to work, reshaping the dented metal. Hammers sound again, but now their rhythm feels like healing, not preparation. Each strike repairs what chaos distorted. Every spark is a small act of defiance against forgetting. The knight watches his armour being mended. He realizes the pieces have aged with him. They carry memory better than he does. He runs his hand over a new patch of weld still warm and thinks of how every scar, on steel or skin, is proof of endurance, not failure. He thanks the smith quietly. No one hears except the iron. Letters and home. When the army finally moves again, it moves slower, lighter, wiser. Messengers ride out carrying letters, confessions written by firelight. The knight writes too, though words come haltingly. He does not describe the battle. He writes instead about the silence after it, about the colour of morning mist, about how kindness still finds space among exhaustion. He ends the letter with, "Tell them I stood, tell them I breathed, tell them I remembered to listen." The return home is smaller than memory suggested. The gate creaks the same way it did before, but his hearing is different now. Children run by, chasing a hoop. They laugh, unarmoured. He envies that weightlessness and blesses it silently. The villagers ask questions. Was it terrible? Was it glorious? He smiles, answers neither. He tells them about the horses instead, about how loyal they were, how they understood before words were given. He talks about the smell of bread in the morning after battle, about comrades sharing water, about small acts that kept the world humane. Glory, he has learned, is a story people tell when they need distance from pain. Honour is quieter. It happens between breaths, in choices no one records. The sword. Retired 1. Evening he unbuckles the sword belt and sets it across the table. The steel catches lamplight and returns it modestly. He oils it, wraps it in cloth, and slides it beneath the chest at the bed's foot. It no longer feels like part of him, but like an old friend going to sleep. He keeps the dagger, though, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that closeness, not distance, defines every true encounter. Sometimes he uses it to cut bread. Sometimes he simply turns it in his hands, watching the reflection of candlelight run along its edge. The blade has seen everything and now wants only to be clean. Teaching. Years later, the yard fills with younger voices. He becomes the one with the cane, the quiet instructor. He tells them not to hurry, not to strike without breath, not to forget that their opponent is also made of fatigue and hope. He teaches that armour is a partnership, not a prison, and that the best blow is often the one not swung at all. The students watch him demonstrate half-swording, see how small his motions are, how calm. They think he is slow because of age. They don't yet understand that slowness is mastery wearing patience. When asked about courage, he says only, "Courage is remembering to breathe when everyone else forgets." They laugh, but later, when sweat stings their eyes, they remember the sentence and stop to breathe. The evening year seasons circle. His hair whitens. The forge becomes another man's song. He spends his evenings by a window polishing the last surviving gauntlet. Not to make it shine, but to keep memory tangible. Sometimes he dreams of the field again, but softer now. No cries, only the rhythm of hooves fading into wind. He finds comfort in small things. The sound of rain on tiles, the smell of hay, the quiet hum of bees outside the window. The world continues its training, infinite and patient. The final lesson. When his time comes, it comes gently. He's found seated, hands folded, a faint smile resting where exhaustion once lived. On the table beside him lies a piece of parchment with a few lines, written in a slow, steady hand. We were not giants in metal, but men who learned to stand. The strength was never in the weapon, but in the breath between strikes. Those who read it later say it sounds like a prayer, though it was only memory turned into kindness. Coda, whisper of time. And so, dear listener, the story folds itself back into silence. The forges are cool, the banners are still, the fields are green again. What remains of all that noise is not triumph or fear, but understanding, that even in ages of iron, gentleness was possible. You have travelled through centuries tonight, through armour and breath and patience. Now the tale rests. If your eyes grow heavy, let them close. Let the whisper of time move softly through your thoughts, and if dreams come, let them be slow, warm, and full of peace. Thank you for listening. Sleep well, traveller of quiet histories, and remember, breathe.